Now, from the combined newsrooms of KARK4 and Fox 16, breaking news coverage.
And good evening, everyone. This just into Fox 16 and KARK. Breaking news. The Supreme Court of the United States has just issued a statement saying it has denied all of condemned inmates Ledell Lee's motions for executions. Simply put, Ledell Lee will be executed tonight.
That's right. Execution is a go. This all according to the governor's spokesperson, J.R. Davis. This happening within the last 5 minutes or so. But we want to show you exactly what we've been following all day long. Ledell Lee's execution has been in limbo up until this point. We have seen temporary stays of execution. We have seen everything be pushed back, and here we are at almost 11:30 on the dot, just getting word from the high court that they have denied the stay. It has been lifted, and that means Arkansas can move forward with its first execution.
Yeah, we want to bring in our legal expert, Marcy Manley, who's been following this very closely. This all started in the early part of the day, and here we are, roughly 30 minutes away from the stroke of midnight, and now it is a green light situation, if you will.
Yeah, for all intents and purposes, the Supreme Court has considered each of these petitions for a stay of execution and has denied access to that stay of execution for Ledell Lee. So with those decisions being made and with those orders being entered, it would seem to clear the way for Ledell Lee to be put to death this evening once he made those applications to the Supreme Court. As both you and I had talked about, Kevin and Ashley, that there was nowhere further to take this. It's the final word on this issue, and had the Supreme Court wanted to intervene, it could have. It placed that stay there. That's the only thing that's been keeping Ledell Lee from undergoing execution thus far, after the 8th Circuit basically denied his claims too. So at this point, it does look like at Cummins Unit, the execution of Ledell Lee will move forward, barring some sort of extraordinary.
Yeah. Ledell Lee, for those of you who may not know, was convicted back in 1993 in the beating death of 26-year-old Deborah Reese. He killed her with a tire iron. Prosecuting attorney handling the case at that particular time said it was fierce, barbaric, and deliberate, and it was all motivated by money. His execution on as we speak. We want to check in with our co-anchors, Bob, as well as Donna, and they are live at the Cummins Unit. I'm sure there's a lot of activity going on right now. We understand that some of the witnesses have already been transported to the death chamber.
That's exactly right. And we just heard from J.R. Davis, who is the spokesperson for the governor's office. He said that they were waiting for paperwork. That's what he said. Then he came back and he said the paperwork is finished. The execution is getting ready to start. So my best guess is he's been moved to the death chamber, so it's getting ready to start.
The process is underway, and at this point, this is where Ledell Lee will be strapped down, and he will get an IV in each arm. One is initially for the drugs, the other one's a backup. And then once the IV is in place, then that's when the curtain will come back, and the witnesses will then, for the first time, see the condemned inmate, and the process will begin from there.
And according to Jessie Tenura, who was here on Monday, she spoke to a family member of one of the condemned inmates Monday, and she said that the family said that they were removed from the witness room. They were not actually in the witness room. They were in a private room and watching via closed circuit.
Yeah, well, that keeps them separated.
Exactly, and one would expect that. So basically in the witness room, it's the witnesses and it's also the media witnesses, and we have 3 of them.
So we'll be hearing from them. There'll be, you think about the activity here now, it's all centered around the death chamber inside the grounds here at Cummins Prison, and the process is underway from what we understand. And at this point too, inside the media room, there is a Arkansas Department of Corrections spokesperson sitting by a telephone. She will probably get a signal that the drugs are being administered, and then at that point wait, and then the next phone call she will get is that the condemned prisoner has died. Yeah. And then we'll probably relay. He will be asked if he has any last words, and then she will relay or he will relay the last words at that time.
Right. So the witnesses will hear all of that, and then once, from our understanding, once Ledell Lee says, if he says anything at all, the microphone will be shut off and the witnesses will not be able to hear anything. So if there's any moaning or any kind of sound being made, witnesses will not hear that.
No, but if there's any kind of reaction adversely to any of the drugs being administered, they'll be able to see.
They'll see it.
They'll see it.
They can see it but not hear it. And then after it's over, at some point there will be a news conference where the witnesses will get to tell us what they saw. This will be inside, though, the media room. They will tell us what they saw. I'm sure we'll hear from a spokesperson for the Arkansas Department of Correction. And it wouldn't surprise me if, if one of the witnesses outside of the media wanted to speak, they would let that person speak if they wanted to do so.
It would be up to them. Yeah.
Right. But anyway, they will give us kind of a blow-by-blow description of how all of this is going down. So as we just mentioned, Ledell Lee is in the death chamber, and they're getting him situated to die.
Mm-hmm. And the process will unfold. I mean, that's where we are now. Now we're in the end stage waiting game.
And this will be the first execution for Arkansas since 2005, and that's a long time. And Ledell Lee was actually originally set to be executed in 1996. He committed his crime in 1993. So it has taken all this time for us to get to this point. And Bob and I know we're staying on our phones, and part of that is because the Arkansas Department of Correction has been slow to give us information. So what do? We rely on Jesse Tenure, who is inside the media room right now, to disseminate information to us, and we also rely on Twitter information from the Attorney General's office, from the Governor's office.
Yeah, there are a lot of things that we're trying to access right now because we are in the middle of waiting for these things to develop.
I have a tweet from Jesse, Arkansas Department spokesperson. We will begin carrying out the sentence of Ledell Lee. Arkansas Department of Correction spokesperson, we will begin carrying out the sentence of Ledell Lee.
Kevin, you got a quick question?
Yeah, and as this execution begins to unfold, as both of you well know, there is one kind of red flag that the state of Arkansas has not been through before, and that is the use of the first drug that will be administered, specifically midazolam. We have seen several other executions in other states where this 3-drug cocktail has been used before, and in some instances the midazolam has not worked according to investigations and reports. The most notable one taking place in Oklahoma involving Clayton Lockett, who was on that gurney for 43 minutes. It was later determined that that was a direct result of midazolam, the misuse of inserting it in proper veins, etc. There is no room for error when it comes to Arkansas using this 3-drug cocktail, even though it is the very first time it has used it.
Yeah, well, I tell you what, Kevin, if there is any indication that that is a problem tonight, that's going to change the executions in this state moving forward. Certainly any of the remaining inmates that were set up for this 8-inmate run. That is one of the things that a lot of the witnesses are going to be looking at tonight.
Well, I didn't mean to cut you off there, Bob, but one of the interesting things also is the media witness for the Associated Press. Mm-hmm. He actually witnessed that situation that Kevin is referring to in Oklahoma. So if this were to happen again, it would be the second time for him to see something like that.
There's a trained set of eyes in there to find out whether or not this particular drug cocktail is effective or is it ineffective.
Yeah.
And you hate to say at this point, I don't want to say that this is some kind of an experiment, but this is certainly something that is on trial, and this will be looked at very closely.
Well, and the midazolam issue, which came up earlier in terms of legalities, and certainly Marcy can talk more about that, but the issue is that it doesn't sedate the person as well as it should. in order to be able to administer the other drugs. The second drug will paralyze you, and then the third drug stops your heart. And so since you're paralyzed, if something were to happen, there's another tweet coming in, if something were to happen, the inmate would not be able to say or do anything because they would be paralyzed.
Jesse Tenor tweeting out that the Arkansas Department of Corrections spokesperson now sitting at that telephone. So now they're waiting for word that will come any minute on the conclusion of the execution.
You know what, Bob, what I find very interesting is even though all of this is happening, and it certainly isn't happening just right inside those doors, it's in another location on this campus, it just sort of surprises me how calm, how calm everything is out here. Although a little eerie, but calm. Calm,
and I would say to the credit of the Arkansas Department of Correction, professional.
Professional, very professional.
And they all take their jobs very seriously, and this is without a doubt probably the most serious portion of their job, those involved with this.
Yeah, I agree with you. Ashley has a question.
Well,
hey, Ashley.
It's 11:40 right now. About 38 minutes ago, Jesse told us that they were starting to move those media witnesses into place. We also know 12 citizen witnesses have to be in that viewing room as well. They will be watching, but as far as the media witnesses go, they will have a pen and pad. That's what they've been provided by ADC. They won't have their phones with them. They can't, start a timer and, keep track of how long it takes for this procedure to go through, because that's a key component of this is the time, and they won't have a clock.
Yeah.
They'll have a pen and pad, and that's it.
And that wasn't the case on Monday, so that's something that has changed between Monday's scheduled executions, which were both stayed, and tonight's scheduled execution. Originally, reporters weren't going to be allowed to bring in those pens and pieces of paper, but that is crucial in order for us to, as the media, to document what is unfolding as we speak. Of course, protesters are certainly watching this very closely. We're giving you a live picture right now outside the governor's mansion where a number of protesters have gathered. Charmaine Nero is covering this live for us. And you can see them gathering in front of the governor's mansion. The governor is not at the mansion this evening. He is actually at the state capitol. He was there earlier this evening for another engagement and has decided to remain at the state capitol watching and monitoring this situation very closely. But protesters, as you can see, gathering in front of the mansion this evening.
And something different than what we have been planning for, what the ADC have been planning for, is a set time for an execution. Well, we don't have a set time. We don't know if the drugs have been started. We don't know, what's happening. We do know that Solomon Graves, the spokesperson for the ADC, where we're getting all of our information tonight, he is already sitting at the phone right now, waiting for updates from the death chamber. So we do know that much right now.
Yeah, and I've just been told that the governor is coming out. Maybe he's already actually, it appears that he has made his way back to the governor's mansion. Not sure if he's going to be talking to the media or if he feels the need to share his thoughts and opinions with those at the protests that are protesting, or maybe he has just returned after getting all of the necessary information and contacting the necessary people to get this execution proceeded. So as a result, he is now monitoring the situation from the governor's mansion. But the order has been given. And I'm trying to figure out who we're looking at. Those might be his security detail personnel there. But the order has been given for this execution to proceed. It's our understanding, having talked with officials at the Arkansas Department of Correction, that the process is underway and that Ledell Lee has been transferred from a nearby jail cell at the Cummins unit and is actually now inside the execution chamber.
That's right, and the last we heard from the governor's office, at least officially tonight, is that Lee will be executed tonight. That coming directly from the governor's office. We have our eyes on the governor's mansion there. We knew earlier in the evening he was at the state capitol watching things and waiting for the Supreme Court to make a ruling, and we don't believe he is there at the mansion right now, but we do want to join Donna and Bob, who are there on the ground in Lincoln County. They are as close as you can be right now without being a media witness tonight.
I tell you, we've been relying a lot on our support that we have out here. That would be Jesse Tenure, who's inside of the media room, Stephanie Sharp, Mitch McCoy. They've been trying to relay as much information as they possibly can to us, and they're monitoring their phones along with us. We're all looking basically at the same information, and the information that you're getting, that you just disseminated, is the same information that we have here.
Something that Ashley, you mentioned too about timing and trying to figure out how this will happen, how long it will take. All of those things have to be recorded by the Arkansas Department of Corrections, as far as what time the drugs were administered, what the reactions were when each drug was administered, and how long it took for the condemned man to be pronounced dead. So all that will be of record. It was interesting. We keep talking about the pen and paper. When reporters were told on Tuesday night that they wouldn't be allowed, I think there was a little blowback by that, because
right.
That's part of what we do, and we're there in part to record history and record what's happening for a number of reasons. But a big part of that too is that this isn't something you see every day.
True.
And there are chances that you're seeing this, and if you're trying to commit most of this to memory, you're going to lose half of it.
Yeah.
So it's important for us to write down what you're seeing. And
yeah, and you're exactly right about that. And also to answer Ashley's question, everything being documented, you mentioned that in the news conference, we should hear what that documentation was. So whatever the Arkansas Department of Correction will document during this execution, they will, I'm sure, relay that information to us during the news conference. At that time, we'll also hear from the media witnesses, and like I said before, if one of the other witnesses would like to speak, perhaps we'll hear from them. Maybe even we'll hear from a family member. It's really hard to say, because this is an emotional thing for them. It may have happened, the killing may have happened 24 years ago, but you know, when you've been living through these executions, or a stay of execution, in this case with Ledell Lee, so many of them over the years, it's like that wound never heals.
And you've got to think the amount of emotion tonight, given the fact that this is an execution, the first one in the state for 12 years, and this family has waited so long for justice to be served. Yeah, it would not surprise me that they would be overwhelmed with emotion and perhaps would not like to speak, or they would.
Okay, all right. You guys, we're going to send it back to you, Kevin, Ashley.
All right, thank you very much, Donna. And Bob, of course, keep us updated. You know, we've been talking about the scenario unfolding as we speak. Another interesting thing that came up was the fact that early on, when these executions were scheduled, one concern that was raised by one of the judges, the federal judge, Christine Baker, was the fact that she had a very big concern that if something were to go wrong in the execution chamber at the given time, there was no phone available inside for the attorney representing the inmate. As a result, if something were to go wrong, that attorney would have to physically go outside the execution chamber, walk down, grab a phone, and notify somebody, leaving his client unattended. I think that has since been changed, hopefully, at least in this upcoming execution here.
But there are plans in place, protocol that has been through the courts, amended by the state legislature, even that, all of that, the law, it is set, and there is a plan to carry out the executions in Arkansas. We want to take a look at what you found in looking into this protocol.
According to the state's lethal injection procedure, the executioner will enter the chamber prior to the inmate's scheduled time of execution. They will inspect what's called the injection drug box, ensuring all chemicals are accounted for. The gurney will be positioned so the deputy director and executioner can directly see the inmate's face and IV infusion site. At that point, the condemned inmate will be brought in and strapped down. The IV team, who are licensed and have at least 2 years' experience, will then insert 2 IV bags containing normal saline. When the flow is secure and safe, the warden will give the green light. The IV team will first administer 2 syringes containing 250 milligrams of midazolam, a sedative that is supposed to make the inmate unconscious. If the inmate is not unconscious, backup syringes of midazolam and saline will be given in a secondary infusion site. There will then be a 5-minute waiting period, at which point the deputy director will confirm the inmate is in fact unconscious. Once that is determined, the second drug will be administered. 2 syringes containing 50 milligrams of vecuronium bromide, a paralytic. Then comes the third and final drug. 2 syringes of 120 milliequivalents of potassium chloride will begin to flow, ultimately causing the inmate's heart to stop.
And that's if everything goes according to plan. Should something go wrong, such as a collapsed lane or problems with one of the IV sites, let's say, they will immediately reduce the flow of the chemicals at that time. The curtains will be drawn. The IV team at that point in time will make the necessary corrections, hopefully restore things to normal, if you will.
Right.
And then the curtains will reopen and the execution will proceed from that point.
All right, and all of that very important. As we inch closer to midnight now, it is 11:49. About 18 minutes ago, that's when the governor's spokesperson told us it's understanding that Lee would be moved to the death chamber. This was about 18 minutes ago, so we don't know where they are in the process at this point, but take a look right now at what you're seeing outside the governor's mansion. Right now, you're seeing protesters. They have been there all night, holding a candlelight vigil to show their support to try and put an end to capital punishment in Arkansas. This is something that they have been protesting now for several weeks leading up to what we have been focused on in these executions here in the month of April. And there were originally 8 that would be carried out. That number has now dwindled down, and we're being told that we will see our very first inmate to be executed in the state since 2005 tonight. Yeah,
those protesters have been in front of the governor's mansion since the early afternoon. Not exactly sure, as we take a live look at the Cummins unit, if there are protesters out there. There were earlier in the week on Monday when the first 2 executions were scheduled. Not a huge gathering like what we see right now in front of the governor's mansion. In fact, only two protesters, showing up at the Cummins unit on Monday night. Not sure what the situation is there this evening, but as we speak, the process to execute condemned inmate Ledell Lee is underway. Exactly where we are in that process, tight-lipped, unsure. But when the execution is completed, we will be notified somehow through the Arkansas Department of Corrections. But we're in a holding pattern yet again, but at least at this point in time, we know that the execution is in the process of taking place.
And we want to revisit exactly how we got here. Marcy Manley has been all over this today, and you've been keeping a close watch on everything happening in the courts. So kind of in a nutshell, explain how we got to this point.
We got to this point through 2 different avenues, essentially, state court and federal court. And the state court of the Arkansas Supreme Court of Arkansas basically denied all of the stay of executions. Those were appealed to the United States Supreme Court, and then also federal courts. The decisions there were appealed. He received denials, and those were appealed to the United States Supreme Court. And this evening, there were 5 issues in front of the Supreme Court this evening, and each of these came down as just single pages with a couple of lines of text, and whereas 35 words spared Don Davis's life on Monday, even fewer words sent Ledell Lee to the death chamber this evening. So it's sort of interesting to think about that all of this process happens, and to get to the one page for them to make the ultimate call of whether the law has been followed, whether the person is guilty and has had their complete processes allowed, so that they can have due process before that ultimate punishment is put into place. And the Supreme Court did take quite a bit of time in putting the stay in. The 8th Circuit had put in a stay to review the cases that were pending before it. And so there was reflection that the court took. What I thought was interesting, we saw the split of 5-4 in the decisions in the early releases in the evening on the 5-4 split regarding the stay of execution and certiorari. And this evening, none of these orders show the vote or show which justices voted which way. We simply know that it takes 5 justices to grant a stay of execution. And clearly, Ledell Lee did not get 5 justices. To point to an issue that you had mentioned, Kevin, is that viewing policy. And one of the concerns was that if these inmates are represented by multiple counsel, only one of the counsel could be in the room and not have a phone to be able to alert someone if something were to go wrong, or to be notified of a proceeding or a development in a proceeding. And so the Department of Correction, along with the attorneys in representing these inmates, came to a proposed sort of joint solution. Up to 2 attorneys can be in the viewing room. A cell phone, it can be given to the Deputy Director of the Arkansas Department of Correction. One of them can leave the room to be able to use that cell phone if need be to communicate with the court or with other counsel. And then that way another counsel can stay inside. So that's how that is supposed to play out per that policy that they filed with the federal court. That was something that Judge Christine Baker wanted addressed so that those rights weren't violated for the inmates, but that is how it's supposed to transpire. It'll be interesting to see who all was there for him and how that was carried out.
Yeah, it's certainly interesting to see that brought up, especially, I don't want to say this late in the game, but we had already, the executions were scheduled. We've been waiting several years for this to be talked about. That's just one of maybe many issues that the state of Arkansas it's been brought up and since corrected, hopefully, but we'll see how it all ends.
It's been quite a while since the state has had to carry out something like this. And I see we're getting close to midnight at this point.
Right. 11:55 is the time right now. Again, this did come down to the wire. Arkansas's first execution in this many years came down to the wire. There were so many legal hurdles. Marcy has outlined so many of them. But this this final ruling from the Supreme Court is just, it's a one-page. It's one page. And, the governor's office called a lot of these last-minute filings blocks for justice. They understood this would be part of the process, but again, they called these blocks for justice when it comes down to the victims and the victims' families. So this is something that it did come down to the wire. Right now, we're waiting to get some kind of word from Cummins, but Bob and Donna are there, and they will be one of the first to know. Yeah,
and Bob, as well as Donna, I mean, based on the research that I've been doing leading up to these executions, the typical smooth sailing execution, if you will, involving the 3 drugs that we're using, takes between anywhere from 6 to 10 to 15 minutes. We know the process has begun. We just don't know if the first drug has been administered yet. So we're still waiting as we take a live look at the protest outside the governor's mansion. But is there any movement from your vantage point being right there? And I know it's taking place behind you, but to kind of describe the feeling and the mood there at this hour.
We are still wait and see.
I was going to say nothing has changed since the last time we talked with you. In fact, there has been absolutely no movement at all. We've been monitoring, like I told you, we've been monitoring social media and getting information, and we're not getting information, I guess is what I'm trying to say. But
sitting and waiting for that, there's a room full of reporters waiting for that phone to ring and for the spokesperson from the Department of Corrections to pick it up and make that call. And once that happens, then that will be transmitted to us out here.
I went on to Facebook Live because we are on Facebook Live, and just kind of getting a gauge on how people feel about this. And I will tell you, it is really mixed. Some people downright angry that this execution is happening tonight, and other people feel like they're relieved. This is something that they've waited for a long time. It's 2 minutes till midnight. It's almost it's 11:58. So it's very interesting when you think about the response. And Kevin, to answer your earlier question about protesters here, there are 2. There were 2, and I'm thinking they're still here. The same 2 people that were here Monday night when you were here. Nothing has changed with that. But we are not seeing anything, Bob.
No, it's very quiet. And on the fact of the note of protesters, in the past, there's always been a rather small crowd out here. There hasn't been a large crowd.
Why is that, you think?
I
Because
think
one would
because
expect to see a lot of protesters here.
If you know the location of where we are, you know, it's kind of off the beaten path, and you wind up, I think the protesters wind up standing far away, and there's not a whole lot of shelter for them out there.
So
I think it's such a rural part. We're not close to a larger city, Little Rock. You've got to drive about an hour and something from Little Rock, but we're closing in on midnight. And Kevin, back to your comments on the timing. Yeah, this generally is about a 30-minute process, given that everything goes right. So I would imagine that pretty quickly we should be hearing something. Once they told us that he was in the death chamber, that was about 30 minutes ago or so. So I would assume just about any minute
and guys,
we should be hearing something.
Curious.
It's official. It's official. Ledell Lee just became Arkansas's first lethal injection in more than a decade. That is the tweet from Jesse Tenure. It has happened. It is done. It is final.
Time of death, 11:56.
It's over.
Before midnight.
So Ledell Lee is has died from lethal injection tonight. We should be getting a press conference very, very soon, and that is when some action will start happening out here, and we'll be able to get more information in terms of what went on inside.
But given the timing of things, Kevin, back to the timing issue, it seems like the timing was right on as far as these things go historically. The witnesses, though, they will tell the story about. We'll get a full update on the midazolam, how that worked, and the process. It has been 12 years since this was carried out here, so you've got to keep in mind too that there's a host of ADC personnel who still have jobs to do. But Ledell Lee will be leaving the Arkansas Department of Corrections system tonight, not under his own power.
We have Mitch McCoy, who's coming out. Mitch, come on over here. Mitch McCoy just left the media room, and he ran over here with information. You're probably out of breath, but what can you tell us? What do you know?
So the PIO for the Arkansas Department of Correction picked up the phone at 11:58. The director said that at 11:44 the injection started. That's the IVs, the lethal injection. A coroner declared Ledell Lee dead at 11:56, and he declined to give a final statement. So some significant developments.
Sure.
Okay, very significant. And he didn't give a final statement. I wondered if he would. When he was asked what he wanted his last meal to be, he asked for communion. So for some reason, I just felt like, knowing that he was thinking spiritually, then he would have something to say.
We do know that Ledell Lee's attorney will be talking to the media tonight. They're going to be holding a news conference, and then also we did know that the family of Ledell Lee's victim was in that chamber, and she declined. The family is declining to talk tonight.
Okay, when you say in that chamber, we've been reporting that the family was in a separate room. Were they in the same room with the witnesses?
Let me re-clarify. They're on prison grounds.
They witnessed
unclear at this point.
Closed circuit, I believe.
Yes. Yeah. And so, but the family's declining to give a comment tonight.
And we were wondering if they would. Bob, you and I were talking about that.
Sure.
It would be, you don't have to leave yet, that it would be very emotional for them to actually speak about it right now.
You've got to think that for the past 20 years, they've been wanting to see justice served, and they've been looking for this, and they've been fighting for it, and there have been clemency hearings. There have been all sorts of things that they have been through, and they have literally poured themselves out emotionally to get to this point, and now it's here. So there is a great burden lifted off them tonight. So,
and they probably need time to process it all before they actually speak. The protesters, from what I understand, at the governor's mansion, lots of tears. Obviously, they did not want to see this happen. You do have people who are opposed to the death penalty. They say, one wrong doesn't make a right, or two wrongs, excuse me, doesn't make a right. And that's what we're getting too on social media. We're getting a lot of people who are just very upset that this is actually happening tonight.
Well, then there's a lot of people too that are very upset that it has taken this long. justice delayed is not justice granted would be the the argument, and that this is taken far too long. That this person was found guilty of a heinous crime 20 years ago, and here we are just now, justice being served. So some folks say this should have happened a lot sooner.
Well, he was scheduled for execution 3 years after he committed the crime. The crime happened in 1993. It was in 1996 that he was scheduled, his first scheduling for execution. That obviously did not happen, but
and then even down to the wire we went all the way up. I mean, think about something that's happening here. Members of the United States Supreme Court were fully engaged in this evening to make sure that the process was moving in the right direction and everything was working in the right way of justice.
Right.
And that was their conclusion this evening. And
you know what, Bob, it's interesting because you and I were talking about we may be seeing witnesses here. Why don't you zoom in?
Yeah, I think we've got.
Why don't you zoom in? Those are the media witnesses that are arriving back for the news conference. And once they get through that news conference, we will certainly know more in terms of what happened. Mitch McCoy was here to give us some information, and we do appreciate the fact that he was able to gather some amount of information, but we certainly do want to hear what those who were actually in that witness room saw. We want to know what they saw. We want to know how they feel after seeing it. And as we've mentioned, the reporters were able to take notes. So, whatever they may not be able to remember off the top of their heads, maybe they wrote it down. Yeah,
and this is also, as much as we talked about this, they've got the paper there to record their observations and things like that. There are some things they will or won't remember. There are many things that will be seared in their memory for the rest of their lives. And some people that I know in the past who have witnessed these executions, and they've gone off without a hitch, it affected them. And how can it not? Right. And they elect not to see it again. So it's one of those things. But it is, and I think there are some people, and you've got to commend them, volunteer witnesses that stood up because something like this needs to be witnessed and needs to be recorded by other people in society. And it's also a thing too. You bring in the argument of does this do its job by punishing the condemned, but also by raising a red flag or shooting up a flare that this is justice. And
you commit a crime,
if you commit a crime, this is waiting for you. I mean, it's been on hold here for 12 years in Arkansas. Clearly, that's no longer the case. We've got a full half a month of executions still to get through, perhaps. So it's one of those things. Will this be the deterrent? There's always been that argument: is the death penalty a deterrent? Because certainly we see that people are getting murdered still. But just to what kind of an impact this will have on some folks, that's always hard to say.
Okay, hang on one second here. Staff administered first drug at 11:44. At 11:44 p.m., Lee's time of death 11:56. Is that the tweet that they wanted me to issue out? I guess that's what's coming out of the news conference right now. Jesse Tenura is inside the media room, inside the Cummins unit, and they are in the process of having a news conference. So we're going to hold off a little bit. We're going to have more information for you in just a short amount of time. But we do see some people who are, I think those are basically workers right there that we're looking at right now.
So yeah, what they'll do right now is that they'll assemble in there, and they're going to have their press conference. It will be an Arkansas Department of Corrections spokesperson will go do a blow-by-blow on what happened. They'll even be describing, body movements, chest heaving, last sigh, things like that, the gaze of the inmate, whether or not their eyes closed. It gets rather detailed. Don't want to get too much of it, but it does, and that just puts those of us who didn't witness it in their room. Yeah. And then the media witnesses will step up and they'll announce who they are, who they work for, and what they saw. Hey, everyone sees something different.
Don and Bob, real quick.
Something different to say and something different to pass along.
Kevin, go ahead.
Yeah, we just got a statement from Attorney General Leslie Rutledge.
That's right. She's referencing the 24 years that the Reese family, we're speaking about Deborah Reese, that they have waited to see justice done. If we can pop that up. She said at the end, I pray that the lawful execution helps bring some closure to the Reese family. She said this lawful sentence, which she keeps referring to it as a lawful sentence of a jury, which has been upheld by the courts through decades of challenges, has been carried out. The family of the late Deborah Reese, who was brutally murdered with a tire thumper after being targeted because she was home alone, has waited more than 24 years to see justice done. And again, we have learned here in the last few minutes that it took a total of 12 minutes for Ledell Lee to die by lethal injection. Again, this family, they've waited 24 years to see the sentence carried out.
And as we heard from Fox 16's Mitch McCoy, the victim's family has declined interviewing, and you have to respect that. You also have to understand that, considering the amount of years they have waited for what I'm sure they're calling justice to finally be served. So that's an interesting fact. Of course, we're waiting for those who were able to witness the execution to come forward and share their thoughts, as Bob and Donna have been talking about. But as you mentioned, 12 minutes from start to finish. And when you think about it, there, in between the administration or administering of those drugs, there was a 5-minute waiting period, at which point the deputy director or the executioner had to wait and confirm that, in fact, Ledell Lee was unconscious before administering the remaining 2 drugs. So if you remove those 5 minutes, the execution procedure in terms of administering the drugs only lasted 7 minutes.
And that's right. And it all started at 11:44. That's when the midazolam was administered first. And there have been a lot of questions about this drug, whether or not it would fully sedate an inmate. And it appears that the drug did what the state said that it was going to do tonight.
Yeah.
They've argued this, you know, even up until this week.
And speaking of the midazolam, I'm curious to see what the witnesses might be able to provide to us as it pertains to how they checked Ledell inmate to determine he was in fact unconscious. In previous executions outside of the state of Arkansas, that has been determined by checking the inmate's eyes or even pinching the inmate to see if there's any type of reaction. Whether that was a protocol or a procedure that was followed here in the state of Arkansas remains to be seen. Hopefully the witnesses will be able to tell us how that was determined that he was in fact unconscious, thus allowing the next drug to be administered.
That's right, and we're learning from Jesse that from the media witnesses, they're telling reporters that Lee was asked twice for his last words. They gave him a second opportunity, and he did not respond there. We do know that he was given a last meal about 4 o'clock this afternoon, which he declined. He opted for communion. That was his last meal, so interesting to see some of his last movements.
Yeah, and he was even asked if he wanted to have his last meal with the prison population, of which he also declined, opting for, as you just mentioned, communion. But the state of Arkansas has, in fact, executed its first condemned inmate in 12 years. A lot of eyes certainly on the state of Arkansas to make sure this was done without any major problems, including the legal challenges, but that is certainly the case tonight. First inmate put to death in 12 years. As you can see, this is a live shot right now outside of the Cummins unit. We're also being told that protesters who have gathered outside the governor's mansion, Ashley, as you can see, have now slowly filtered away.
That's right. There were about 30 to 40 people estimated at one point there at the governor's mansion. They've gone home for the evening. At this point, we're waiting to hear from the media witnesses. We're also being told from Jesse that Ledell Lee's attorney is going to speak with the media tonight. We will hear from him. He was likely one of the witnesses there tonight. So we want to go out back to Cummins, where Bob and Donna are right now. You guys have any new information?
Essentially what's probably happening inside there is a press conference in front of cameras with all these folks presenting exactly what it was that they witnessed, and there may be some Q&A back and forth, of course, with Ledell Lee's attorney when he's up there. And so this could be a little bit of a process, and then once these folks are excused, then they'll head this way, and we'll try to get them to you as soon as possible.
Yeah, we are hoping, we're efforting getting one of the witnesses to talk to us tonight. So we have some folks working on that. I've been sending some tweets to both, or not tweets, but text messages to Jesse Tenura as well as Mitch McCoy, who are in that room right now during the press conference, to make sure that we can get someone out here who can talk about what they saw tonight.
And you know, Kevin, we go back to the protocol. You know, this is going to be one of those things. The argument against midazolam is going to be harder to make, because it appears that this execution went off as planned, without any flaws. At least we presume that right now.
Way.
Yeah, we haven't heard otherwise. But the timing of it, and the fact that we're not seeing any tweets to the contrary.
Well, you know, we have a string of cars leaving right now, so these could be family members as well as witnesses that are leaving, and workers. I think Monday night when you guys were here, you saw a lot of workers that were leaving, so that's part of it. They've been here for a very long time and ready to go home.
We got something else from Jesse.
Media witnesses. Lee appeared to lose conscious very quickly, and only thing they could see was his face and arms. Media witness, Lee was asked twice for his last words. We just said that. So that kind of addresses the issue of the midazolam drug. If he actually was able to lose consciousness that quickly and easily, it seems like the drug worked.
And when the other drugs were administered, didn't show any reaction to them.
Right.
So.
Right.
Which that was kind of given the fact that the execution of someone who killed someone was why we were here, but also a lot of eyes were watching that, the administering of midazolam, and how that was going to happen.
Sean Murphy, one of those eyes watching from the Associated Press.
Very critical.
Because he actually witnessed a botched execution, and it dealt with midazolam.
So that was a set of critical eyes that a lot of folks want to hear his take on all
that's
this.
why I do want to hear from him, because I want to hear, I mean, even though we heard media witness, and perhaps that was him, but I guess there's another tweet from Jesse here. Give me a minute to clear. Media witness, it appeared Lee did not suffer. So that's what we're talking about right now. At least 12 civilian witnesses, 2 attorneys, and the Department of Correction officials.
And if I'm not mistaken,
no
I
one
think I
said
just saw
anything.
a hearse that just drove off the grounds. If so, that was Ledell Lee.
That was
at least
quick.
It appeared.
That would have been very fast. So anyway, it seems like everything actually happened the way that the Arkansas Department of Correction wanted it to.
That they practiced, they've trained, and they put all these protocols in place, and they went down the way it's supposed to.
Yeah, and from what I understand, the protesters outside the governor's office, or outside the governor's mansion, they're dispersing. There were lots of tears, lots of sorrow. They didn't want to see this happen, but it's over now.
And it opens up the door to what we have to move forward with, because we will be back here Monday night. We've got two more inmates that are scheduled to be executed. And I guess we know, if we could bring Marcy in for a second, if we could jump ahead to Monday night. I'm not sure the weight of their appeals, or if they're exercising any request for stay. I think a couple of them had said, under the grounds of physical inability, the fact that they are not physically able to be put to death by the drugs because of their Marcel Williams.
Marcel Williams, he actually, and Jack Jones will be the other person who's scheduled for execution. But Marcel Williams, I read when he was arrested for his crime, he weighed about 198 pounds, and in the course of the years, 2 decades, he put on another 200 pounds.
Yeah.
So the question is, will these drugs actually
are they strong enough
for him?
So a number of questions still ahead, but tonight, slowly wrapping up. Monday will be Monday, but again, we're still waiting on some witnesses to come out here and and hear their take on what happened tonight.
Okay,
by
we're going to
witnesses.
toss it back to you in the studio. We want to take care of a couple things out here, get our ducks in a row. We really need to get a media witness.
Yeah, all right.
So we'll talk with you
guys
in just a second, okay?
Get
Sounds
back
good.
to work,
Thank you.
and we're learning from Jesse right now that the governor has called this the most grave responsibility he'll ever have. The right thing was done.
Yeah.
That is what J.R. Davis has told reporters tonight, that again, this was one of the biggest responsibilities, and he has talked about that leading up to tonight and how he felt confident that the state would be able to carry out these sentences, and it looks like they did tonight at 11:56 with Ledell Lee.
Yeah, and let's not forget about the victim's family. In fact, the governor's spokesperson sending out a tweet via Jesse Tenor, who works for us, saying that the victim's family can go to sleep tonight for the first time in years, knowing that justice has been carried out. Obviously, a very tough and difficult time for them, and it's been years in the making.
My family has lived in the shadow of this event our entire lives.
In February 1993, 27-year-old Ledell Lee robbed and strangled 26-year-old Deborah Reese in her Jacksonville home. He then beat her 36 times with the same tire thumper her husband gave her for protection. Her son was only 6 years old.
My mother was everything to me.
24 years later, Joseph Lucky, now a grown man, whose loss still affects him every day.
When she was ripped from my life, it started a spiral that I almost didn't recover from.
Lee was sentenced to death 2 years after Reese's murder. Prosecutors say she wasn't his only victim. Lee committed violent crimes against 5 women, all in the Sunnyside area of Jacksonville, some involving rape, some ending with murder. His victims' ages ranged from 17 to 70.
He is the embodiment of the evil that should never have to exist in this world.
After 21 years on death row, Lee maintains his innocence. He and his attorney arguing he deserves post-conviction DNA testing.
He's not here to ask for forgiveness. He's not here because he's remorseful for a murder he didn't commit.
His victim's son asking one thing: let it happen.
Let us have some closure. Let this end. Let us step out from this shadow.
And that was the son of Deborah Reese here. You heard there, Joseph Lucky, who was there at Cummins tonight, able to watch his mother's killer be put to death.
Yeah, closure, if you will. They might call it something different. Obviously, a range of emotions, as we can only imagine they must be feeling. They have declined interviews with the media, and certainly we will respect that. We understand that, and that is by all means their call. Maybe at a later point in time they might feel differently, but for them, this chapter has been shut.
That's right. And closure, that is what the governor's office is reiterating. The family will have closure, and that is what they want to focus on right now. It is somber, and they acknowledge that. It has been tense at times, and I'm sure it has been frustrating this night as it is carried on now into the morning of April 21st, as we are learning tonight at 11:56, Ledell Lee was declared dead.
And the spokesperson for the governor tweeting this through Jesse Tenor, saying this calls this a somber night, and says the state was able to carry out the process well. They have been fighting for these executions for the victims' families for decades. The governor very passionate and very outspoken about this, saying that he set these dates for these executions to take place. Granted, the first 2 were not executed, and a second inmate who was supposed to be executed tonight, his stay was granted, but a different story unfolding for Ledell Lee, who at 11:56 tonight became the first Arkansas inmate to be executed in the state of Arkansas since 2005.
That's right, and the first time the state has ever used the 3-drug protocol involving midazolam. A lot of controversy surrounding that and how the state acquired that drug, whether or not it was effective or not. But from start to finish, it took 12 minutes for Lee to die by lethal injection tonight. We're learning that. We want to go now back to Cummins, where Bob and Donna are standing by right now with some new information.
We are still waiting on that media witness, but we do have J.R. Davis here, spokesperson for the governor. How did it go?
Well, I spoke to the governor shortly after, and he had a few words he wanted to express to the media that were in the media room, and that's just that it is a somber night across Arkansas. That he understands that this is one of the most grave responsibilities he'll ever have, and that it's a night of reflection. But in the end, we know the right thing was done tonight, and justice for the first time since 1993 will be provided to Deborah Reese's family, and I think that's the important takeaway from tonight. But
did he have anything to say about the personnel here at the Arkansas Department of Correction, the folks who carried out something that hasn't been done here in over 12 years?
They did an outstanding job under the circumstances as well. Obviously, a late decision from the Supreme Court, but ADC staff, as we've said all the time, the governor has the utmost confidence in them, and Director Kelly, and that showed through tonight. So thank you all very, very much. I appreciate it.
Okay, all right.
J.R., thanks very much.
J.R. Davis from the governor's office, and you heard what he had to say there. I guess what we need right now is just to hear from someone who actually saw what happened.
And this is one of those things that's going to take a little time for them to wrap up in there. And, hearing from J.R. kind of puts it in perspective, exactly. I mean, it's a somber night. Justice, this end of justice is the extreme part. A life was taken because a life was taken. And it's an equation that no one ever wants to be part of, but it's the justice system.
It's the justice system in the state of Arkansas. That's how we do things here. And it happened tonight, first time in 12 years that it actually came to fruition, I guess you could say. And you were right, you did see the hearse pass by. So immediately they put his body in the hearse and it's being taken. And I've seen that, and that's what they do for, because it's just I think that's protocol, and as soon as possible, and moved off the grounds. As I mentioned, it's the first time he's been off ADC property in over 20 years, but as I mentioned, not under his own power. Jesse Teneur sent out another tweet. Lee's legal team left without making a statement. No more statements tonight. Expect updates tomorrow afternoon. So that doesn't mean we won't get a media spokesperson to come out here, but it sounds like the press conference is over.
At least as far as his legal team is concerned, that's for sure. And again, too, you've got to think that they have invested a great deal of their time and their emotions and their efforts into trying to keep this from happening. And they've become very close to the inmate. And
yeah, I think I looked at that. No more statements tonight. No more statements from his legal team, not necessarily the folks that are in the news conference.
The legal team.
Yeah,
they're going to pack things up and head home.
Yeah, it's interesting. Social media, a lot of people are able to vent, and I'm seeing a lot of that tonight. They're venting one way or the other, and frustration because it happened, frustration because some people are not happy that it happened, or satisfied, I should say, that it happened. It's just what you expect.
One of the most polarizing parts of our justice system is capital punishment, and it's definite. It's a hard reality that when you're in a state that has capital punishment, and if you take a life, your life will be taken in return.
Yeah.
If it rises to that level, and this certainly did. Deborah Reese was a young woman who was home alone, and husband was on the road, and she was violently beat to death.
Her husband was a truck driver, and he gave her a tire iron.
A tire thumper.
A tire thumper.
Which is a small, it's probably like half of an axe handle.
Okay.
And it's what they use to pound their tires to make sure they're inflated. It's a very dense piece of wood.
I've seen it reported as tire iron, but thanks for the clarification. But he left her with that so that she could protect herself, which ended up being the same weapon that actually
took her life.
So we're watching a lot of cars leave here tonight. A lot of the workers are leaving. They've been here. I think they come in around noon. for these executions, and they're here for a very long time. I'm sure there will be a shift change at some point, but probably more people than usual, more workers than usual, and people on the grounds tonight for this execution.
And it's not to get off point, but once there's a shift change, it's not like anyone else leaving work. I mean, they've got to stop at a gate here. Their car has to be checked. Trunks have to be open, because you can't just drive off of prison grounds without going through somewhat of a fine-tooth comb.